Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony just got to finish rewatching the Ohio State Notre Dame game. We're going to make that a weekly segment this week where, we've seen the game in person, obviously, and then we'll rewatch it and kind of, you always see different stuff when you're watching from a different angle. And I'm down on the field, so I really don't see and hear, there's certain stuff that I see a lot of, and then there's certain stuff I don't see at all. And, getting back up to, watching that game now all the way through, it's like, I can see why people are annoyed that they didn't run the ball as much as they might have been able to at certain points during that game. It's like, I can see where that angst is coming from.
And while you're missing stuff on the field, I'm way up in the press box, and after the game, I'm like, did Javonte Jean-Baptiste even play? Because up where I am, 9 and 8 look exactly alike. And especially if I'm not looking for him and I see a single digit, it's like I just assume it's 9 from that far away. So, after the game, we call the podcast the instant reaction. I'm wondering, is this the delayed reaction? Mm-hmm. Is this, on second thought or something like that? We'll come up with a name, maybe. Just rewatching the game, probably.
We're doing it 3 days later, so maybe this is the Greg Schiano defense delayed reaction episode of the podcast, something like that. Give us a chance to really overthink things, overanalyze things. What do you think? I'll take that as a yes.
Now is not the time to talk about that, Tom. Now is not the time to talk about Greg Schiano. So what we're going to do is just go back and forth some of the stuff that we learned or maybe had confirmed, or just some things that we picked up while watching it. Tom, I would love for you to go first.
All right. Well, the first thing was I did not realize until I saw the snap count piece from our friend Dan Hope over at 11 Warriors, where he tracks every snap count. I didn't realize Josh Proctor played 5 snaps. He played the first, I think it was basically the first series. He missed that one tackle on Lorenzo Styles on the first play from scrimmage. And then I don't think he was back in at any point later in the game. I felt like I had seen him out there, but apparently not. And, Lathan Ransom, I think part of that might have been exactly how annoyed Jim Knowles was at the missed tackle on the first play from scrimmage, handing Notre Dame the ball, kind of in field goal range already. But the other piece of that is, man, I knew Lathan Ransom played well, and then you go back and watch it, it's like, no, Lathan Ransom played really well. I think, there was one complaint about Lathan Ransom all night, and that was that the hit on Tyler Buckner where he was kind of sliding. And even that, to me, is kind of I can't really blame Lathan Ransom for that, because they're playing it on the broadcast in slow motion, and the rules guy is saying, well, look, you see him sliding there, and as soon as he starts sliding, it's like he's not watching that in slow motion, you dingus. He's the amount of time that happened between the feet sliding in real time and Lathan Ransom really kind of going to go make that hit was less than 1/10 of a second. I really can't fault him for that one. Even if it was technically by the rules of the foul, I just can't really fault him for that. And other than that, he played great. He it feels like, all the camp hype around him was oh yeah, you really saw it on Saturday night.
Clearly Jim Knowles loves him. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Josh Proctor and also that hit by Lathan Ransom. I'll start with the hit by Lathan Ransom. That is, I think Ohio State is very, very fortunate that wasn't targeting, because that was a helmet to face hit. And me personally, having no clue what targeting is, I could see that and be like, that's targeting. If the Mike Hall thing gets reviewed for him lunging with his head and hitting somebody in an arm is going to be reviewed for targeting, I think Ohio State was very fortunate that wasn't reviewed. And as we know, if it gets reviewed, it can be overturned, and stupid things can happen in review. And so, while I know people are upset about the questioning the sliding call, I think just take it, because if he gets ejected and it isn't out there for the second half, then you go to Josh Proctor or whatever, and that's fine. But the Josh Proctor thing, he did come back. I saw him first, and I don't know if this is true or not, because I might have to go back and watch to see if he's somewhere on the field. The first punt, the gunners are Jaden Ballard and Jackson Smith and Jigba. The second punt, I think Josh Proctor is back out there. I think Jim Knowles was so mad at Josh Proctor that he told Parker Fleming, don't even put him out on at gunner right now because like I'm furious. But he was out there at gunner for some other things. He did come in on a 3rd and 2, and he was playing at the line of scrimmage with so that was an interesting look. I'm wondering if that's like a Court Williams thing later on, or what they're going to do there, or maybe that becomes a Josh Proctor thing if Lathan Ransom is the new one. So I thought he came in and I think it was maybe only one snap. I don't know how much he played after that, but he did come back. But it feels like that was an incredible message, and now an indelible message for these guys. Like they're going to know because that was a corner blitz, that first snap of the game. Corner blitz, Denzel Burke to the quarterback. Josh Proctor has to make that play, and he didn't. And it's like this is Jim Knowles saying, "Can't have it, won't have it, and if you do it, you won't play."
Yeah, I mean, if Jim Knowles wants to be aggressive, but part of being aggressive is he has to be able to trust you to get the guys on the ground behind, because if you're bringing corner blitzes or you're going cover 0, the cavalry is not coming. It is on you to get that guy on the ground, and Proctor didn't even come particularly close to getting him on the ground. It was not a particularly great angle. It was just was not. It was not good. You kind of saw it and you went, okay, I can see why he didn't play again, or didn't play much again. So yeah, that was definitely one that really jumped out to me. Something else that jumped out to me was this is a very different Ohio State kickoff team, and that maybe part of this is, boy howdy did Notre Dame make some terrible decisions in the kick return game. But you had a couple times when Ohio State kicked it. They were not necessarily doing the kick it deep inside the 5-yard line, outside the numbers every time. Like a couple of them ended up in that area, and it was a walk-on freshman kicker Jaden Fielding doing the kickoffs, which I assume that was going to be Parker Lewis's job, and then Parker Lewis was not eligible yet, so therefore it fell to Jaden Fielding, and he did a really nice job. The kick coverage team did a really nice job. Chip Trainum had a tackle at the, I think like the 12, 15-yard line on the opening kickoff. Xavier Johnson had a tackle at the 12, 15-yard line right after he scored a touchdown on that ensuing kickoff. So that was impressive to me. You wonder if that's going to, teams seek Ohio State covering kickoffs like that. I think in general teams are going to try and be aggressive on those, and that's why Ohio State does those kickoffs to try and bait you into doing, trying to return it and not just taking it at the 25. I wonder if we've sort of seen the end of teams doing that, and now teams are going to look at this and go, I don't think we're going to get past the 15-yard line, so they will just fair catch it. The one thing I thought about this during the game. There's another thing I'll get to later that I thought about during the game, and I just didn't mention on the postgame show, but the after the touchdown where Notre Dame had some kind of a personal foul on the PAT, Ohio State is going to be kicking the ball off from, the 50 or the 45-yard line. That's the perfect time. Like, if you have an opportunity to steal a possession there, and I know Scott Frost got just absolutely savaged for doing a crazy mid-game onside kick, but it doesn't have to be try and dribble it 10 yards. It can be some version of the Maryland a couple of years ago Chris Olave onside kick, or pop the ball up real high and try and drop it between a couple guys and have someone run under it kind of onside kick. That's an opportunity to do something and potentially steal a possession. Ryan Day was real conservative in a couple different spots. It's easy to do that when you're playing Maryland and you're going to beat them by 70 points. But you really, that's one of those, if the talent is equated, that's when you really need to try and steal a possession in some way. And, punting on 4th and 3 at the plus 40, or not trying to steal a possession there. It seemed like there was maybe a missed opportunity there to just kind of swing the momentum a little bit even more, steal a possession, and potentially take a bigger lead there.
You're kicking off from the 45 or something, 50-yard line, and so you're going for the touchback there, and you'll put it at the 25, or you try an onside kick and Notre Dame ends up getting it at the 32 or something. It's like what's the difference? What's the risk? You're buying an opportunity for about 8 yards, and I think that's worth the purchase. I will say, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but when we drafted which freshman would play first, I had Jaden Fielding, the kicker. I don't know that anybody remembers that show, but how about that? That's I don't know that anybody would have. Well, somebody would have, but that's a surprising one that he is the first true freshman, the only true freshman so far, I believe, to see action for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I remember that. That was the show that we forgot to record and never got published. So you'll just have to take Tony's word for it. And believe me, it's every bit as real as you think it is.
Something that was very real and is still very real is JT Tuimoloau. I ended up just watching him like every snap, and just because I wanted to see how effective he was, and you can only see so much when you're watching all of this in full speed. And so, like his first 6 snaps, he was in the backfield every single time, got by his guy. And then things started to slow down a little bit, and they started to double him more. They started to roll away from him more. He started to become, I think, part of Notre Dame's play calling, basically. And so, they adjusted to him. Then he adjusted back to that and was getting into the backfield again. A few times he tried to spin move, and none of the 3 times that I recall were really effective. One of the times he got put on his butt from I think a guard waiting for him to spin back to him, and he's like, no. This office is closed. So I was still really impressed by what he was able to do. Like I said, they rolled away from him. They even had him spy the quarterback on at least one play. That was the Lathan Ransom hit on the sliding quarterback. If he brings the quarterback down, like Tyler Buckner juked JT and got past, and then he slid, and so that was, if he brings him down, you don't have that personal foul penalty. The one touchdown drive that Notre Dame had, JT was never on the field for.
Yeah, the defensive line, I think, in that whole drive, was that the drive where Jerron Cage and Tyleik Williams were on the interior of the line, I think?
And Tyler Friday and JJB were the defensive ends.
Yeah, and then, you didn't really see that lineup again, and I think that's probably, reflective of Jim Knowles recognizing that hey, again, I'm going to shout out Dan Hope for the second time in the show. The 2 defensive ends who had by far the most snaps, like almost double the number of snaps of anyone else, were JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. And it's like, I think we anticipated that there would be a changing of the guard at some point during the season, and that point was the first game of the season. So the guard has done changed. So. I would expect that to be probably the case moving forward. You did see a good amount of Zach Harrison, but yes, Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Tyler Friday were, I think Tyler Friday had less than 10 snaps. So, there is a role for those guys, but I think it's pretty clear who the ones are at this point. All right, my next one, boy, Tony. The receivers were not getting open in the first half, but boy, as soon as they started running the ball in the second half, all of a sudden Marvin Harrison's open a lot more. Wasn't that a strange coincidence?
Are those things related?
Who's to say? It's an impossible coincidence. Who could possibly argue whether those things were related or not?
It is also, I've learned that if you run the ball, you have a better chance of running it. So that's something, because if you don't run it, you're not going to be able to run it.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of tie in a related running the ball thing here, because I had more than 5, but we can combine a few and it'll be fine.
Yes.
We'll still call it 10 things we noticed, even though it's more than 10. It's like buy 10, get a few free. Who can complain about that? Check the comments later and find out. It felt like they were running the ball consistently, but not necessarily explosively. They were, they didn't have any long runs. I now have forgotten to look what the long run of the day was, but it feels like it wasn't much longer than 20 yards. But man, there was that Mayan Williams run where he got around the corner and there was nobody there. And I'm on the far side of the field, diagonally across the field, 60 yards away. And I was like, boy, Mayan Williams looked really annoyed that he, I've got a picture of him jumping up and being really, frustrated that he didn't, that he went out of bounds. And you watch on TV and it's like, oh boy, he's frustrated because his foot slipped on, maybe the turf was a little wet and that's why he slid into the boundary just a little bit. But boy, that was, if he doesn't get tackled, that is an 89-yard touchdown. And first of all, they hit their 220 and 220. So I also was on the sideline jumping and expressing my frustration. But yeah, it was, he, you don't think of him as the big play guy, but he was real close to being the big play guy there. And, this is a good Notre Dame defense, but they were running the ball pretty consistently. the interior of the offensive line was pretty good. Here, I'm going to give you one more bonus because I'm just going to tie this all in together. The interior of the offensive line was so good that when CJ Stroud was running sneaks, they weren't picking up 1 yard and 3 inches when they needed a yard. They were picking up 3 yards when they needed a yard. They were picking up 3-4 yards when they needed 2 yards. There were only a couple sneaks from CJ Stroud, but they were just bullying Notre Dame on the inside of the offensive line, which, considering that the inside of the Ohio State offensive line was maybe one of the big concerns coming through camp, that was like, that's probably a good sign for Ohio State.
One of those sneaks, one of the Notre Dame defensive linemen is looking over at a teammate talking to him, and then the ball is snapped, and he just looks over, and just this wave of offensive line comes and puts him on the ground. And the long run of the day was Travion Henderson, 16, Maya Williams with 15. And we know home runs are nice, but I think Ryan Day is kind of a money ball guy where he is imploring his offensive line and his running backs to get those 5 to 7 yard carries and just be consistent with it. Get on base, just whatever you do, keep us ahead of schedule. And that's what they did in this game, when given the opportunity. So that was, it was good to see for sure for them. My next one, I guess we can stay on the offensive line because I also watched every snap for Paris Johnson, and I thought he was really, really effective. I'm not grading him. I'm not PFF, or, I'm certainly not a scout. I went to college. Sorry, that was just a dig at somebody who might be listening.
Hi, Kyle.
But Paris Johnson, so I watched every snap, and I jotted down every time he went against Isaiah Foskey, because we talked about this as a big matchup before the game, talked about it all week. Those two guys, All-American defensive end against potential All-American offensive lineman left tackle. I have it here, Paris Johnson 12-2 when they went against each other, and in terms of Isaiah Foskey, the best rush he had was the Xavier Johnson touchdown catch. Like, he got into the backfield and CJ just kind of sidestepped and threw it before he got there. And he had another one right before then that he kind of did the same thing, got in the backfield. After that touchdown, I think it was then the next time Paris Johnson saw Foskey, he pancaked him and put him on the ground, I believe, on a running play. So it was a big matchup coming in. I think Paris walked away with it. He had more trouble with one of the Adamalola brothers, Justin, I believe. And so that was a good watch for me, and I was impressed. He did really, really well, had many, many more good snaps and bad snaps. In fact, I don't know that he had more than 2 or 3 snaps where it was like he got beat by his guy or he missed somebody.
Yeah, he was, Isaiah Foskey, they showed him on the impact players of the game graphic they put up, and they had 4 guys up there. It was Brandon Joseph and Isaiah Foskey and I think Travion Henderson and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And, Jackson Smith and Jigba, you heard his name a lot. Sometimes you saw CJ Hicks's face while you were hearing Jackson Smith and Jigba's name because, multiple numbers, sometimes tricky. But Isaiah Foskey, it was like you heard his name on the impact players of the game. I don't know that you heard his name on the broadcast again that night. He was just kind of not a real big factor throughout the game. And, DeJuan Jones had a couple penalties, and I think he got beat once, at least for, a pressure on CJ Stroud, if not a sack. But yeah, Paris Johnson, I think, was very, very solid throughout the game. I would have him as, he's someone who, the offensive line, if you're not talking about an offensive lineman, odds are they're probably doing just fine. You didn't really hear, you didn't hear Luke Whippler's name really throughout the night. You didn't hear Matt Jones's name throughout the night. You didn't hear Paris Johnson's name throughout the night. Donovan Jackson, I think, had a holding penalty and gave up a sack very, very early, but other than that, he was pretty good. It was really overall, I think, a very good performance from the offensive line on the whole. So I would not be surprised to see at least 3 of those guys grade out as champions when that comes out. It hasn't come out as of the time we're recording this. It might be out by the time you are listening to this. So my next one, boy, this is something I noticed during the game and I forgot to talk about on the post-game show because there were a million other things to talk about. Marcus Freeman did a pretty good job managing things overall, but the last minute before halftime, holy Moses, You get the ball with 35 seconds left at your own 21. The opponent only has one timeout, and somehow you neither threaten to do anything with the ball nor run out to half. Like Chris Fowler's talking about the fact, well, they're going to go to halftime with a lead, and then 16 seconds of gameplay later, Lathan Ransom is about 3 inches away from blocking a punt for a touchdown. So, Marcus Freeman, don't do that again. He runs the ball on first down, calls timeout, throws a pass on second down that was not like a great shot at anything, and wasn't particularly close to hitting, and then runs the ball. Ohio State calls a timeout and gets a chance to block up, potentially block a punt. Like, whew, that was a series of choices that were made, and that feels like one that Marcus Freeman's going to learn from. That was relatively short, so I'm going to give you a little bonus one. Until I was watching the game, I did not remember the stories of the transfer special teams guys. The kicker for Notre Dame being a transfer from Arkansas State, and the punter from Notre Dame being a transfer from Harvard. Tony, what do you think they talk about in their meeting rooms when they're like, so, what was your life like before this? I bet they have a lot of things in common.
Tom, I don't know that they do, honestly. One guy's trying to talk about Shakespeare, and the other guy's like, well, we named our hog Bill.
One of these schools had literally a tree stand in their stadium that was like, the best seats in the house promotion. They have literally a tree stand. Also, there's Arkansas State. Just kidding. No, in fact, it was in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and not Cambridge, Massachusetts, that they had a tree stand. Yes. I'm sure that is a surprise to you.
No. The most disappointing thing about Marcus Freeman with the clock and all of that is he's young enough to have grown up playing video games and football video games and should know how to call timeout or not call timeout or let something run. Although I guess maybe when you're playing the video games, you're really not trying to let any of the clock run. So maybe you play too many games. That's what we're talking about. My next one, Tom, is I was really impressed with the way they were defending the jet sweeps, the fly sweeps, the quick end arounds with Chris Tyree, and he had their biggest run at like a 14-yard run. And to me, it was still really well defended because it was Tommy Eichenberg, I believe, gets blocked as he should, but they're running away from Cody Simon, who's at the far linebacker. So he's running all the way down, coming down, and gets past the blockers who are coming out, the linemen who are coming out to get him. Cameron Brown is the corner being blocked one-on-one, and he's got a receiver blocking him. The sweep is coming towards him. The jet sweep is coming towards him. And then you've got Ronnie Hickman also coming in, and all three of these players converge for a tackle. And all three of them would have made the tackle, I think, by themselves without teammates there. And for one, that's pretty good, and certainly a good improvement from last year in terms of everybody fighting through and everybody being able to make the play. Two, just having help is an improvement from last year. It's like not just Cameron Brown didn't just have Cody Simon. He also had Ronnie Hickman. Like all three of them were there, and that was guys covering up for everybody, but not covering up, but doing their jobs and being there where they're supposed to be. And it just that was the big gain, and it was maybe the most impressive. But they had other sweeps where they got blown up. There was one, I think Jack Sawyer set an edge, and then they had to figure out something else to do. And JT Tuimoloau was in there, and Tommy Eichenberg did his thing. Just really impressed with that. It's a way that it slows timing down. It screws things up. They use it as fakes. Wisconsin has done it for years with the fake sweep and the actual sweep. And to see Ohio State already doing fairly well with it, I think that's a positive sign for down the road when it's going to be much more difficult against Wisconsin.
And that was, I had something very related on that list, which is just, there were multiple Buckeyes around the ball a lot. There was a lot of times when there were 3-4 Buckeyes around the ball. And, usually we took one guy to tackle them, and then there were 3 other guys there just in case. But I think that's indicative maybe of how they're playing a little faster. They're a little less predictable, so they're probably a little less easy to block. They're coming from a bunch of different angles, which means, how often did you see there was like a Tommy Eichenberg blitz right up the gut where the center went left, the right guard and right tackle were both blocking someone. I don't remember who, it might have been JT Tuimoloau out on the right edge. And there's just a lane, just an expressway for Tommy Eichenberg to go right up the gut and just smack Tyler Buckner right in the face. And, it felt like they're less predictable, they're playing faster, and that leads to a lot of guys around the ball, which leads to fewer big plays because, even if one guy misses a tackle, there's 3 other guys there to make a play. There was another one, might have been an end around where Tommy Eichenberg, it was either an end around or like a little screen to a wide receiver, where Tommy Eichenberg kind of had the guy around the legs, and then Zach Harrison flies in and cleans up. It was just, there were constantly multiple guys around the ball kind of gang tackling, and that's something that Jim Knowles has talked about throughout the year is something he wants to see, and he saw that on Saturday. So that's probably a good thing for him. CJ Stroud, to me, watching that game again, CJ Stroud was simultaneously worse than I thought and also better than I thought, where it looked a lot at times like the first game of last season, where he's got receivers open and he's kind of like bouncing it or he's overthrowing. And there was one where he overthrew Cade Stover and it was like he had to get it over the defensive lineman's arm. So that was why it was a little high. But he was high and then he was low and he was a little behind guys at times. But also, you can see the development. They made a big point about talking about CJ Stroud recognizing the double safety blitz on the Xavier Johnson touchdown. That was something that Kirk Herbstreit was talking about on the broadcast. But, you see that. You don't freak out. You just know, okay, well, the spot where those 2 guys used to be, now there's no one. So you throw to the guy there and you get a touchdown. It's like, and that was an easy pitch and catch for CJ Stroud. That was, I think that was a very positive thing. You had another one that I noticed during the game and that I didn't bring up on post game was there was a right before halftime, Trey Henderson had a really nice run off the left side, and there's CJ Stroud blocking for him downfield. Like 10 yards downfield, CJ Stroud is down there blocking. And then there was the throw to Emeka Egbuka. This might have been right before the missed field goal, right before halftime on 3rd down, I think, where Egbuka's kind of like running a drag across and then, Herbstreit's talking about how he should have sat down in the zone, and that's why the throw was a little behind him. So, and if he does, he might have scored a touchdown there. Like there was no one behind, behind Egbuka, and it's just a question of can he get to the corner first. So it felt like CJ Stroud he was a little off. That wasn't a perfect game by any means. But, statistically he finished last season with 72% completion, so he was a little worse. He was 71% completions against Notre Dame. So, okay, major step back there. Only 230 whatever yards and a couple touchdowns. It was like a perfectly fine day. But CJ Stroud right now, I think the expectations for him are such that it's like, oh, boy, he was way off in that game. And it was like, he missed some throws. But even on what you might consider an off night, he still had plenty of moments that were like, oh yeah, this guy turns out he's pretty good.
Yeah, you could see some frustration at times, or with his receivers. You should have been here. Like I need you here. Where there's some coaching going on afterwards, and I wouldn't say frustration, just some communication issues, and that he had to get righted. And it'll be interesting to see how that comes in the coming weeks with. Even when Jackson Smith-Njigba comes back, like there's still a bunch of other young guys, and even Julian Fleming, who's not a young guy any longer, not like he's been playing a bunch. So that stuff will need to get remedied, and I think everybody expects that it will. One that I have here is I feel bad for Denzel Burke, because all of these corners, you have all of these PFFs and there are other things like that, which put these standings out, targeted 3 times, targeted 7 times, no completions, hasn't given up a completion of more than 12 yards or, all season long, or all of these stats like to display how good somebody is, how good these corners are, how shut down corners they are. And then you've got Denzel Burke, who gave up 2 catches in this game. Maybe more, but like the 2 catches he gave up, the one to, the Braden Lindsey kid, the diving catch at the end of the first quarter that was probably an incompletion that wasn't reviewed, or maybe it was reviewed, but nobody knows. And then the other is the bobbling catch on the ground. He gave up a 31-yarder and a 32-yarder, and one was definitely a catch, but it was a freak catch. It was a fluke catch. The other, a questionable catch, and now both of those get put on Denzel Burke, and it's like, well, you're at the bottom of the standings because you've given up 2 30-yard receptions. You can't possibly be any good. And I remember saying after the game of the Instant Reaction podcast that he didn't look very happy after the game. And I don't know that he ever looks happy because he's not really one of these guys, these corners that are talking all the time or are flamboyant during a game. He's always very business-like. I know he does do some smack talking, but I think all game long he was just pretty stoic, and I'm wondering how frustrated he was when those are the two catches that get tacked to your name.
Well, I mean, there was a stat from CFB Film Room on Twitter that said there were only 3 receptions of 10-plus yards downfield all game for Notre Dame. So that's 2 of them, and they were both kind of a little bit fluky. There were only 2 games last year with fewer completions, 10-plus yards downfield against Ohio State, Indiana and Rutgers. So, I mean, you think about how, completely helpless those teams looked against Ohio State. That's kind of the neighborhood that Notre Dame was in on Saturday, at least by that metric. And, if the one juggling one was, I mean, that's like you just got to kind of tip your hat. Like, what are you going to do? The guy is laying flat on his back and caught it after, 3 bounces. So that's just going to happen sometimes. But yeah, no, I think, in those metrics, he's not going to, he's not in a great spot right now, but obviously that's going to probably trend. Prediction, he's not at the bottom by the end of the year. How about that? Can we start our bold prediction show with that one right now for this week? Another, while I'm talking about that CFB film room thing, they talked about Buckeyes making contact with Notre Dame ball carriers at or behind the line of scrimmage on 63% of their run plays. And I saw that, it was like, wow, that is simultaneously a very high number and also maybe not quite as high as it felt like watching that game. It just felt like Ohio State was just living in the backfield. Notre Dame averaged exactly 1.4 yards before contact on runs. That was the 4th best since the start of the 2021 season. So I guess 3 times last year they were better than that. But again, you're right at the top of the list in one of these good pass defense categories and one of these good run defense categories. And it's it's like, okay, those are all kind of good indications that how dominating that defensive performance was. The other thing that I wrote down, it was one of those things I just didn't think about during the course of the game because it didn't mean anything at the time. But the last points of the game that Notre Dame scored were 11:56 left in the second quarter. So functionally, it was the first 18 minutes and 4 seconds of the game. Notre Dame scored 10 points, and then they didn't for the last, more or less, 42 minutes? I mean, that's pretty dominating. Jim Knowles, I mentioned this on the morning show on Monday, but Jim Knowles, in his last 6 games as a defensive coordinator, last 5, I think, for last year, and this one against Notre Dame, last 6 games, Jim Knowles' defenses have shut out the opponent in the second half. So, you hear people talk about Jim Knowles and the great adjustments that he can make and how he kind of take over games late. That's a pretty good indication. Like, yeah, that's it was either 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5, something like that. It was consistently dominant and consistently shutting people out in the second half, which that's what you're looking for as a defense.
Yeah, last year Oklahoma State allowed like 7.6 points per second half all season long. In conference play, it was down to like 7.1 or 7.2 points. I also wrote about Jim Knowles today and did some charting of the running game, and I'll just throw some other stats out here for you. Of Notre Dame's 27 actual rushes against the Buckeyes, 16 of them resulted in 3 yards or less. And of the 11 rushes that went more than 3 yards, 4 of them were by the quarterback. So the running backs, basically, they carried the ball 19 times, and 4 of those carries went beyond 5 yards. And that's pretty dominating, and if you do that every game, good luck losing. My last thing, which is like my 6th thing that I just want to mention, we saw Cam Martinez. I think he only played a couple of snaps. I haven't looked at the snap counts yet from Dan, but he was out there in a dime package. So, seems to me that we had speculated that he was going to be the dime. I would think that was confirmed on Saturday. Will it be confirmed next Saturday? We'll see. I would expect maybe more dime from the Buckeyes next week, but we weren't sure who would it be? Would it be in a corner or would it be Cam Martinez as he is the backup nickel? Does that make him the starting dime? And it looked like it did. So that's the last thing that I really have, Tom.
All right, so now we will change the headline to 12 things we noticed and give you some extra bonuses in there. I saw we did a morning show. I did a morning show with Kevin last week, and it was like 3 Buckeyes to watch, or 3 Buckeyes who could make a bigger impact on Saturday. And then someone in the comments said, clickbait, you talked about more than 3 guys. It was like, I can't even tell if you're serious at this point. Like, maybe. So, yes, at least 12 things we noticed. Then the headline gets too long. So, sorry, you will have to accept some imprecision in our numbers at times. That's all right.
10 plus. So, all right, that will do it then. I appreciate 10-ish. How do you spell? We just we'll figure it out. That will do it then. A reminder to all of you, check out BuckeyeHuddle.com. It's a fantastic website. That's where we are. We are there now. And it was a very good week covering the Notre Dame game. Tons of stuff that we have worked on and added. The 2.5-hour post-game stream, the continuous stream from almost the final whistle. Mark Givler was on there for about 20 to 30 minutes before Marcus Freeman. We streamed to him and then threw it to Ryan Day and then back to Mark and Devin Radcliffe talking X's and O's. Then Tom, you got up there and you were in the press box chatting with them. And then I got up there and then we just dropped it to you and me and Kevin behind the camera. And it was, you didn't have to go, you only had to go one place for all of your post-game coverage. And it was a lot of post-game coverage. Like I said, about 2.5 hours or so, actually over 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 35 minutes, as I recall now, to go along with our, hour and a half or so pregame coverage that we also had for you. So that's all on youtube.com and just search Buckeye Huddle there and you'll find us there. Subscribe. If you're watching now, then you know where we are. Subscribe, hit that bell, get notified when we decide to go for an hour and a half or 2.5 hours or whatever on a random Saturday, mostly game day Saturdays though. But anyway, that will do it for us. Thank you all for joining and we will talk to you guys later.